for me, it's all about focusing in on what the local area can give you, and then obviously looking further afield where you can't find what's available locally, and taking a collaborative partnership type approach.
Welcome to the Hospitality Maverick podcast with me, Michael Tingsager. We at Hospitality Mavericks are here to inspire leaders to create heart-centered and profitable businesses from the inside out, the kind that both employees and customers love and support. This episode marks a great milestone for the show, as we start an amazing partnership with the wonderful people at BizSimply. Our aim together is to celebrate society's reopening and the comeback of our beloved hospitality industry. And we believe that we as an industry need to find new ways to become even more innovative, from how we lead our people, how we operate and grow our businesses, to how we serve our customers. And we want to share strategies and tools that can make the industry thrive long-term, not just survive. Today's guest shares a big passion of myself, how to save the planet and changing the way we eat. I'm 100% sure that this conversation will not only make you reflect, but maybe change your thinking about food and how your true food choices can make a positive impact on people, communities, and the planet. Domini Hogg is the founder of Rider Supply, which is the purchasing solution for food service providers to drive efficiency and sustainability across the supply chain. Domini explains what agroecology is and why hospitality should get involved. Domini also talks about the importance of understanding where your food is from and why it's important that operators in hospitality work on having a clear understanding of their journey of the produce from farm to plate. We discuss if it makes business sense to become more sustainable when it comes to food and menus, and we dive into why buying locally is important beyond just the food miles. We also discuss the new savvy consumer post-COVID will demand that you as a business and restaurant are offering menus that not only taste great, but also make a positive impact on the planet. We talk about some of the pioneers across the industry and what they are doing to become more sustainable, and how they're making impact through operating with no bins in the kitchen to educating their customers. Domini shares her journey and lessons and gives some great advice on how leaders and individuals can make more impact through their food choices. And if you want more Maverick insights, please sign up to our weekly newsletter on hospitalitymavericks.com. Now grab notebook, pen and coffee and learn more about how to make more impact through your food choices. Enjoy! Today we are blessed with a very, very exciting guest, because we're going to be talking about something I can't even remind myself that we've been talking about this podcast. It's something I've been talking about, how do we actually make a better world, how do we make a better impact besides making profit, how do we actually make sure we make positive impact on our people, the communities we're part of, and the planet. And there's definitely planet relevant what we're going to talk about today, because we're going to talk about the thing we should know more about than we actually do, because we probably know more about space travel than we know about the ground underneath us, the soil we are living from, we're feeding ourselves from. And for that conversation, I was super excited to have Domini as a guest. Welcome to the podcast, Domini.
Hi, Michael. It's wonderful to be here.
We had a couple of conversations prior to this conversation, and I hadn't met you, but you reached out to me, and I thought this is like absolutely super interesting. And you reached out to me on the back of the hospitality and the infinite game that I did with David Tenery, and we talked about a lot of different things. I think it was the No Planet B conversation you touched on and said it's super interesting when you talk about the connection between land and people. So for people that don't know who you are and what you do, can you just give them a bit of an overview and your background and why you're so obsessed about the land and where our food comes from?
Sure. I think it really comes from just a passion for nature and being surrounded by it. And I've had a mother who's always been into food, and so I've got a real interest in food and farming growing up in a rural area. But I've actually combined that with a career in software. and also tea. So selling tea into hotels and restaurants, really high end tea. That was where I started my career, and the two kind of came together. And what I'm really passionate about now is what I've set up with Tried and Supplied, which is a food web, a collaborative and user friendly food web that is designed to help food service businesses become more sustainable and communicate this to customers. We help them make better purchasing decisions and manage purchasing from multiple suppliers, communicate and then communicate that to customers in terms of both sustainability and nutritional information on the menu. It's it, what I'm really excited about is the power of the software to connect people together and enable them to collaborate, and how that can then feed into the changes that we can make for a more sustainable food system.
Yeah, and one of the things I noticed when I talked with you was that, why should actually, in the world we live in now and where hospitality is and it's difficult times, why is this actually interesting for hospitality and the future we are heading towards? Why it's so important actually to start to understand what you actually, the food you buy, what kind of impact it has on the planet and humans when they consume it.
Yes, I think what I found really interesting was attending the Oxford Real Farming Conference this year. A big topic there was agroecology, and it's the way they describe it is that it's how you mimic nature in farming, and it builds on indigenous practices that have ancient wisdom that we've had for years and generations, but we've kind of lost in the latest generations through industrial farming. And so agroecology is reintroducing that and building on it to mimic the natural ecosystems, and also to see the food system as a connected whole. And I think what's so important is for us to understand that sustainability is a connected challenge. And if if we don't see the natural world as a connected ecosystem, and all of our systems within that, how does food get from farm to plate? It's a whole connected system. So I think it's really important that we everyone understands better the whole system. And so often people are thinking about what they eat when they live in an urban environment, and actually many don't know that much about how the food is produced. And so agroecology is interesting, and the reason I think that hospitality should be getting more involved is that it brings everyone closer to where food is produced, and gives a much better understanding of how it's produced, so that we can much better make decisions around what we eat, for the benefit of not only ourselves but also the planet.
You would say, if you put your business hat on, and especially in these time, is there any financial benefit for that? Because there's no doubt about understanding where our food comes from and how it impacts us, and how it impacts the planet, that we grow food in the right way. It's a good thing. It's a nice thing. Maybe somebody say, but how do I survive? Does this actually give sense from a bottom line? Is that actually commercial viable to start that journey?
That's a very good question. I think one thing that the kind of agroecological solution does is it provides greater resilience for a business, because it gets you thinking more about what exactly is the role in the food system that we have as a business, and that actually is much more multifaceted than I think many restaurants might be thinking of. So it's not just a question of serving food to people, but actually I see it much more broadly in terms of adding value to food. So if you start to see that as the role of what you can do through the skill sets that you have within hospitality, then it enables you to create a much more resilient model, which I think is so applicable today, with trying to manage with so many different restrictions. So it's things like how do you you could be not just cooking the food, but you could also be potentially processing food that you then sell um, as a kind of deli item or a grocery item. It could be that you're looking at how do you educate and provide fun experiences, educational experiences for local communities. So you've got a different element of that, and that could be either virtual or within the premises once that's allowed. So there's an element of education, there's an element of how you're adding value to food, but there's also kind of getting closer to the farmers and the producers themselves opens up other opportunities, and not only does it shorten the supply chain, so from a value commercial perspective, more money gets to the farmer, but also there's still ways in which it can be a lower cost to the restaurant as well, because the margins in the middle have been cut out, and because you have that closer relationship with the producers and suppliers and the farmers, it becomes much more collaborative, and that enables opportunities for higher margin products in terms of specials. Also understanding, for example, rotation crops are crops that are grown in order to kind of make another crop work in a regenerative system. So if you're buying the crop that has, the whole reason why it's been grown, it's got the highest value from the farmer's perspective, finding uses on your menu for the rotation crops is going to be a good way of getting higher margin crops into the menu. So working together with the chef and the farmer, I think there's a huge amount of opportunity in terms of commercial opportunity, in terms of becoming more resilient, but also reducing some of the margins that are within the supply chain itself. And then the final thing is, of course, that particularly now with COVID and Brexit, I think there's a lot of interest and focus from consumers on sustainability and sourcing locally. And so it's a commercial driver in terms of bringing customers into your restaurant as well.
Yeah, what I think is interesting in this conversation, and something I started looking into the last couple of years as well, is the way, it's because we buy food in a certain way, the behavior around and the standard we set to the food. The farmer is then producing the food that way, but that doesn't mean that's the way he want to do it, because he knows that if he's mistreating his land, the way with how he uses his farm, he has no rotation, he's just doing one crop, he actually knows that it's going to be a food desert at some point. It's just about a question about if it's going to be him while he's managing that land, or it's going to be the next one. Everybody knows, and you're already seeing that in the US, where that's a big issue. They call it food deserts over there, where there's like no food because the land is just destroyed. But it can be brought back to life if you start rotating and actually work with nature instead of against it.
Yes, totally. And actually, that's one of the things that with Tried and Supplied we are encouraging is to, if there are farmers, for example, that really want to make a change, but it's a big investment for farmers and it's a long-term investment as well to start growing something different, and also therefore to stop doing what they were doing before. And in order to do that, it's really helpful for them if they know that they have a local market who would be able to do something with whatever that new crop is that is beneficial for their land. So it's about kind of connecting those two together, really.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've seen, I can't remember we actually talked about this prior to this interview, but I watched, I think it was back in September, October, I watched Kiss the Ground on Netflix with Woody Harrelson, is a nature narrative on that. And he talks about, they talk about, that, in the US, there's actually a movement to actually, go back and actually work with your land as you did pre Second World War, where after the Second World War, the whole world became very industrialized around the food supply. And they have successful turned around farms that was losing money to actually making money that way. It may be a bit harder in the beginning, but then that becomes into a system and nature almost take care of things itself. And those farmers now, their business is valued much higher than it was pre that, because they are suddenly a bit like in a restaurant pre-pandemic. If you only had one revenue stream, that was people came in and sat and eat in your restaurant, now you have takeaway, you have click and collect, you have home meals. And in a similar way, the farmer then get a more diversified business model, but also more healthy land to grow his crops on.
Yes, I think also he's not kind of grinding his asset into the ground, because soil is a major asset for farmers, and there are so many things that affect it. But nearly all of the things that are done through industrial agriculture in terms of monocropping, and ploughing, and also the use of chemicals, are affecting the soil quality and the main asset that they're working from. So in terms of the value of their business, if they're basically destroying their own asset, it's not going to last very long, and doesn't look like a good investment. But I think now many of the farms that have started to regenerate their soils have found that through careful management, it does build up the soil quality over a few years, and that makes a huge difference. And then they don't have to worry about all of the expenses of the chemicals that they would otherwise have put in the soil. There's a reduction in cost there as well.
That's super interesting. They say that in the documentary as well. There's some like operational cost that just disappears, as one of them is for the chemicals and machinery as well. They don't have to maintain. That's actually just eating the bottom line for their business. What about like you touched a bit on menus before, because eating local and seasonal, you've seen high end restaurants promoting that. You have the Denmark where I come from, Noma is very known for that. There's others as well. You have a Silo in London that moved from Brighton to London, where it's all about eating seasonal and also have no waste. Is this these kind of menus? Are you predicting that's and a kind of version of that is what you will see across hospitality going forward, or is that your dream to see that more hospitality restaurant businesses will adapt that kind of approach to their menu, where it's seasonal and focusing on no waste, and actually thereby the menu probably going to be smaller, not the typical Chinese menu kind of setup?
Yes, it certainly would be my dream to see that happen across hospitality. I think there are lots of different approaches to creating a sustainable menu, and I'm not sure it's going to happen overnight. In fact, I'm sure it won't, because there's lots of changes, and I think it's very important that businesses go step by step. You can't, suddenly become the most sustainable restaurant overnight. Albeit I know that Douglas McMaster really did do that in terms of actually starting out without a bin, which I think is very impressive, but probably beyond where most people would want to start. I also think that we don't know yet what's going to happen in terms of workplaces and whether people are going to go back to work in the same way. And I think that will reduce the demand for kind of fast food on the go kinds of options. And I think it will mean that people are much more interested in local residential places where they can go for a really nice meal out and experience, where they can learn a lot more about the food system. I was on a webinar recently, and it was with Douglas McMaster and Charles Michel and Johnny Drain, and they were talking about how food is our main connection with nature. And I think that people this year have really felt like they wanted to connect more with nature, and so I feel like that's an experience that restaurants can really offer people once they start to reopen.
It's interesting, the ones you see, an example, E5 Bakehouse in East London is like the one that comes to my mind, that is very connected about where the flour comes from. They actually they where they get the seeds from, in principle, and they follow that. But also they have like such a connection with their supplier that they can tell that story in a very different way. So you actually buy into them in a different way, because they have done that, and they're not available for everyone. I know there's some elitist here, but again, the more we actually can start to take that kind of behavior down through the food system, and actually connect people much more with the land where it comes from. Because I have had chefs employed sometimes that's never been on a farm, which have like surprised me. Especially when I did a business in Denmark where they've never been on a farm. So actually what we tried to do then, there was a realism in that, okay, if they don't know in principle where tomatoes comes from, we need to take them there so they understand that connection in a way. And we didn't have any higher purpose with it, that we thought it was important that you know where food comes from and how it's grown and how long it actually takes to create a tomato. It's not just something that comes on a truck and then it's just available. So it's interesting that actually a lot of people, even when they work in food, have never actually been out there and actually been on a farm and understand, or with the fishermen on the harbor to understand where things come from.
Yes. We were actually working just before the first lockdown with a cafe that was opening with a digital menu. Sorry, not digital menu, digital receipts. And so what we were working on was making sure that they had a set of suppliers that were everything came from a single origin, so that it was really clear to be able to communicate that story on their digital receipt. So everything that they sold in the cafe would come with a receipt that would tell the story of all the ingredients within it.
And when you work with a cafe like that, or a client like that, what a typical thing they approach you with as well? Where does they start? Because there's probably people thinking out there, oh yeah, I know this is important. When it's raised, you know this is important. I need to do something. I need to be part of educating people. I need to get started. How often is the path, and it sounds expensive. That's probably people who will say that as well. But how is the typical, starting of that interaction when people approach you and say, we need to help, we want to do the right thing, and we need to start this journey? What is typical the situation?
Yes, I think it all different types of situations we see, and the main thing for us is that it's not, as I said before, it's not going to happen overnight. So we see our role as very much supporting restaurants in whatever wherever they're coming from, wherever they're starting from, and helping them to develop that in a step-by-step way. So sometimes, if it's a new opening, for example, it's a bit easier because it's a clean slate, if you like. And so you can start with the actual sourcing of all of the suppliers and getting them set up to be managed all within the same system. But if it's a kind of already set up and running, there are often established relationships with suppliers, and that's also fine. And many of them will be actually very, very good suppliers. So we work with restaurants to get them set up with whichever suppliers they want to work with, whether they're already existing within our ecosystem or not. It's very easy to add them in. And then we've been working with the Sustainable Restaurant Association on what it is that they would like to see for customers on menus around sustainability, as well as also with Cafoodle on the nutritional aspect of things. So we are able to get all of that information from the suppliers. So if you've already got suppliers you're working with, we can provide them with all the relevant questions and information that they can then provide, which then lives within the same system and is easy for restaurants to access and use it to tell that story on the menu.
Again, that's where, when you come to how technology actually can help you doing the heavy lifting, not only from an operational point of view here, but also from also transparency, but also from an impact point of view. You can really start actually going down the journey, finding out how do you actually impact things, because we can all do small things around, because food is its biggest impact on climate change, as we talk about in No Planet B in that episode of Hospitality and Infinity Game. Food is one of the biggest impact, and something we do 3 times a day as humans. And chefs or restaurant owners, they have food in their hands all the time, so you can really make a big impact even with small changes. And it's great to hear that your system also helps the documenting that, because there's also sometimes, how do I actually document this? How do I actually tell the world about this?
Yes, I think that's one of the things I was talking to David Chinery about in terms of how they are creating a restaurant that gives more than it takes. Is how do you actually demonstrate that? How do you prove that? And he was talking about different, ways of doing that. One was around qualitative. There are various schemes that kind of like certifications that ask questions and then calculate it and provide you with a kind of certificate or rating on various different aspects of it. Like a soil association organic, for example. And then there's the quantitative side in terms of calculating carbon footprint and reaching net zero and things like that. But there's also the narrative element, and often for small businesses, that's the one that is most manageable, and it also sticks with customers much better. It may not be as rigorous in terms of all of the analysis that goes into the qualitative and the quantitative side of things, but it is very effective in terms of communicating what you're doing with in terms of sustainability to customers, and whether that's in terms of telling them that the menu's made from recycled paper, or it could be explaining that the food on the menu comes from within a 20-mile radius. It's involving them in that narrative, and that's generally what sticks with customers and gives them that connection with nature that I think everyone is so thirsty for today.
I think also it's the again ability to, is storytelling you're in principle talking about here, but also the ability to back those stories up when you need to, because there's always, different people want different layers of the story sometimes. And that thing you can start actually documenting and backing it up, because I think still, I don't know what your experience is, but I think there's still a bit of a view on that all this saving the planet can that actually be done through food. It can not only be done through food, but actually can take a very large chunk of it. But there's still this skepticism sometimes you are hit with, and especially if you're raising money for your restaurant venture as well. There is some skepticism that it does actually make sense to do things sustainable, and of course you have to make your choices sometimes financially as well. What are you doing sustainable?
The way that I see it is, it's all about transparency, and actually having shorter supply chains is very helpful in that respect. It enables you to tell the story much more clearly, and sustainability is it's a sliding scale. That you can always do more, but if you get put off doing anything at all because the end goal seems so lofty, then we'll never get anywhere at all. So for me, it's all about understanding that there's lots of different steps to becoming sustainable, and making that effort step by step to trying to achieve it, but being completely transparent with your customers about what that means and why you've made those decisions.
Yeah, and also it's a journey. I talk with that with people as well, but so many other things is that it's not about being perfect. It's also like taking the journey and making the progress and actually telling about why you're doing what you're doing, and say, well, we are not here. Everything is not organic yet. Maybe that's not even the ambition, because maybe that's not sustainable, because maybe I guess as it is right now, there's not enough production actually to cover that. So that's not what it's about. It's actually maybe just starting, maybe thinking seasonal about things will have a massive impact on how we take things from our land and what we do to our land and what we put in our tummies as well. I don't know what your view is on that.
Yeah, I think seasonality would have a huge impact. There's a lot of talk about changing our diets to fit what the world needs. But actually, I think it would be so much better if we approached it in a more local way and tried to understand what our local area needs and produces well, and would want from a regenerative perspective what should we be producing for the health of our soils and our local ecosystem, but also us as people, to make sure we have a diverse diet, and connecting those two together more rather than trying to think of it on a global scale. Obviously, there are going to be things that we have to get from abroad that we can't grow, but trying to orientate your diet around understanding what's available locally and when makes a huge difference to the overall sustainability of what you're eating.
Yeah, one of the things I discovered as part of another business I'm involved in is that, like, grains and pulses, I thought that was something you got from, abroad. That's where you normally get your lentils and stuff like that. And then I discovered a company called Hot Dots. And Hot Dots, they only sell, locally grown grain pulses. There is actually a British chickpea, believe it or not. A kind of form of it that is actually grown in Norfolk, I think it is. And again, they are right now, of course, a bit more expensive because it's not done on the same scale. But if you could start people to get used to that, actually, and understand, actually, you can get all these things. They may be just in another variant. They maybe have another color, but they do the same thing. And then maybe there's much more nourishment in that local product than there is something you get brought in. Because it does, as soon as you pick a fruit or take something out of the ground, it starts to lose its nourishment and vitamins. From that second on, it's already dropping things. So the shorter it is to the plate, the better is it for you as well as an individual. And I think another interesting element in that just sparked my head there again. You said like it's trying to dictate how people should eat. That's equals failure in my world. How to help them hack? Maybe everybody wants to eat healthier. They want to eat more greens, but how do you help them doing that? How do you actually help them get the right things on the plate, and how do you educate them in that? Because it's not because people don't want to, they just don't know how sometimes, and then convenience take over instead.
Yes, in the words of Dr. Johnny Drain on the webinar, we need to show people the tasty, and I
Yeah.
think that's so true. You've got to motivate people through the taste of and showing people how beans and pulses, for example, can taste wonderful rather than what they might think of from their school dinners. Another person I wanted to bring up is Ollie Hunter, who is very good at utilizing. He has a lot of organic produce, which you might think is more expensive, but his view is that actually it enables him to save money because he can get the whole carrot, including the carrot tops, for example, and then use both, and it creates two different dishes. The carrots themselves have more flavor, so he needs fewer of them to create a wonderful sauce. You have to think of it in its totality to see how you can move forward with it.
So how do you see that? What do you think? Because this all sounds like the thing we need to do, but what do you think the real threats are to get to that point? Because one of the things you said in the beginning as well, that one of our biggest challenges is that actually we are playing with nature. We may be breaking nature, and the pandemic is maybe one of those signs. I believe it's one of those signs that nature have said, "Hey, enough now. Now I'm going to give you a bit of a lesson, dear sapiens. You need to behave." What is your view? What is like the biggest threat we have to a future where we can change the way we consume and buy foods, and also the way we then eat food in restaurants and so on, from directly from the farmer and more locally? What is the big threats to this?
Personally, I think a lot of it is to do with capital and where it's focused, and also how that influences what we read in a really subtle way. There was a very interesting talk, which is now on the Oxford Real Farming Conference YouTube, called Spinning PR, and it's all about how much of the food system is controlled by a very small number of companies, and how they are influencing what we understand about food, and also investing in new food alternatives, and how they're utilizing scientists to get that message across, and also trade organizations that they kind of sit behind, and are kind of silently funding. So the difficulty with agroecology as a concept and how we can create a sustainable food system is that it requires a move away from the kind of concentration of power within the food system, and that's obviously going to have a lot of resistance.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. I think that's for many areas in society where power is just collected on a very few hands. You can take that from how organizations run as well. That the decision power lies in the top, and the knowledge they think the knowledge lie in the top. But actually, if you put the decision power out into the front line and out in the real world instead of a few hands, it will actually make it better for everyone. because people feel more engaged with that. I think that's a very interesting thing. I think again, that there's definitely some big players that needs to change as well their minds and behaviors around the food stuff. And it's quite interesting. You mentioned within that, you mentioned that alternative foods. Because that's an interesting, because I'm a bit skeptical about food that is created without any food in it. It's almost like this created this kind of, especially there's a lot of vegan products. I don't mind people are vegan or anything. There's a lot of vegan products. I become a bit skeptical about what they put in them to make them almost like a cheese, because it's not a cheese. And I understand if you don't want to eat cheese, you don't have to, and you don't want to. But what is it that they're putting in those products? Are they good for our bodies or the nature? I don't know. But what is your view on that as well? Because that comes again from a very focusing on creating a consumer product more than what's good for nature, I guess.
Yes, I very much share your skepticism about food that isn't food. I think it very much depends on the producer and their approach to creating what they're creating, what the product is. But I'm pretty skeptical because I also see that there's a huge amount of investment going into alternative proteins, for example. Often that's another kind of way of, that's where you make the bigger margins in the food system. But it's also where you end up with those companies that they've been what has driven us into this problem in the first place. For me, nature really is, as you say, it's just, I feel like it's trying to teach us a lesson. And if we are trying to tackle the mess that we've put ourselves in with further industrial processes, it rather than trying to go back to understanding how nature really works and working with it rather than against it, that's my worry.
Yeah, and I guess also what I can hear you saying, and one of the things I believe as well, that we need to get to a point where we are not, how we eat is not dictated from factory farm food or factory produced food. Is dictated by doing the right thing with the land, what's good for the land, it's good for the people as well, and make that sustainable, because that model has been sustainable before. Why is it that it can't suddenly, after the Second World War, why is it that not sustainable anymore? And that's the question, that I think that needs to be answered, because there is, examples of it actually can work. It can work for the farmer, it can work for the price the consumer has to pay, because it doesn't have to be elitist or Planet Organic or Whole Food prices to get some proper food. I think you gave the example with the chef as well. You need less of it because there's much more umami flavor in it as well from a taste point of view, and you get all your nutrients in few of them as well. And I think also that's what we've forgotten. Maybe we also just, it's the amount we consume that these factories have learned us that we actually need more than we actually need. I think in Planet B they say that we need, can't remember now on top of my head, but I think we need 2,000 calories a day, and there's produced 5,000 a day per human being on the planet. But we still have people that goes hungry to bed, which sounds absolutely crazy. But with that said, there's no doubt about we both are very passionate about this and believe we need to do something, and it's not as simple as it sounds. We understand it's complex, and you said that as well. This is a journey, probably of 1,000 miles or more. But there's no doubt you're very passionate about this, Domini. But what actually would you have wished, with what you're doing today and when you started out your career, what would you wish you have known then? Because I guess you landed with this at some point, but what would you really have liked to know from that starting point when you started your career?
I had no idea how complex it was. I guess that was probably a good thing, because it meant that I had the naivety to get started with it. But it would have been helpful to know a little bit more about, how complex this whole situation is. Having said that, I have found it fascinating learning about it. And I do like complexity. So that's actually one of the things that I, really enjoy doing from a software perspective, is to make simplicity out of complex situations.
Who has actually like inspired you? Because I know that a couple of people that put things in front of me that made me look into this and become interesting in soil health, for example, and how you feed yourself and how you buy food. But who has actually inspired you on this journey? Has there been any specific people? You mentioned your mom earlier in the conversation.
Yes, I mean, she's obviously given me a passion for food. And both my parents have been very supportive and from an entrepreneurial perspective. I mentioned Ollie Hunter before in terms of kind of people within the industry who have really inspired me. He's someone, and we had a conversation quite early on about where he was comparing tried and supplied to mycelium, which is, if you haven't read it, there's a wonderful book about called Entangled Lives or Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. And it's all about fungi and how it's connected and helps connect plants under the ground, which is essentially it is designed to kind of share nutrients and communicate any issues or problems. And that's ultimately what our aim is as tried and supplied in creating that food web. So I loved his analogy of it being like mycelium. And I've now read the book, and that's a wonderful book. I think there are two other people from within the industry that I really find inspiring. One of them is Chantel Nicholson. I think she really has done a fantastic job from a sustainability perspective, and has shown a huge amount of dedication. It's very similar to Douglas McMaster and dedication to making it really work and work sustainably. But I loved what she did by setting up All's Well to motivate her staff during the pandemic. And I just, really hats off to her for finding it within her to set that up and get it going in such difficult circumstances. And I think the final person I'd like to mention is Andrew Lussman, who is also very, very dedicated to the sustainability side of things, but is also brilliant at making business decisions. I really admire the way that he approaches that in a very kind of methodical and data driven way. So I think that the industry is full of really inspiring people, and are constantly meeting more of them. But those are a few of the ones that have really inspired me.
So you've gone on the journey, and you said, like, if I knew that it was so complex, I probably wouldn't have started. And like many entrepreneurs, there's always people want to hear the success story. But what is the biggest failure where you really have learned something? Because I think that's really interesting for the audience from an entrepreneurial point of view, where you said, okay, that failure really hurt, but I really learned something from that.
I think it kind of comes back to the same thing of not really, I wish I'd learned more about the marketplace. And I think as an entrepreneur, you are so passionate about what you're doing. It's hard to imagine how other people may not be quite as passionate as you. And I think learning how to kind of really see things from other people's perspective and kind of toning down that to kind of see, well, what would it look like from where they are? And I think that would have really helped me earlier on if I'd understood that. Now I always, try and think about it from other people's perspective, and just ask myself, well, what would be the worst case scenario? Because I'm a constant optimist, and hugely passionate about what I'm doing. So I need to be constantly reminding myself to think about it, from the opposite end of the scale. Yeah, I've had conversations with customers where I think not understanding that has led to probably some of the biggest failures. I think that's probably what I would say.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So what is the downside? And I know there's another big entrepreneur called Richard Branson. That's what he's asked himself all the time, because
because I could imagine, I have never met him, but as a game changer, I can imagine he get very passionate about what he wants to do, and forgets maybe the blind side or the downside of our project. What is the downside, and what is take up rate on this? Besides, I think it's a great idea. I think that's a really, really good reflection there to share with the people out there. Again, we are in a precarious situation, if we say it mild, with hospitality right now, and that's some of your clients. What is your prediction for hospitality as it is right now from what you've seen? We all observe different things. What do you think the key obstacles right now is for people to come back in a way, and where do you see it land? It's always a difficult question because it's like looking in a crystal ball, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think agility has got to be one of the biggest obstacles, because you don't know what's going to be thrown our direction. And I think that's where I feel like kind of reimagining business as what are those core skill sets that you have within your business, and seeing your business as a kind of combination of those skill sets, rather than, we are a restaurant or we are a software business, and thinking about, well, what can we actually do, and how can we add value? And I feel like the skills that chefs have, for example, are so versatile in what they can do, in terms of, cooking, processing food, actually selling and educating their customers. It doesn't have to be just, cooking and serving a meal. And I feel like that agility is going to be, if you don't have the agility, I see that as being a major obstacle for the next at least few months. And creativity around cash flow as well. I think that's obviously going to be a challenge. But what I would like to say is that, being, I guess, the eternal optimist that I am, I really do see that, once hospitality is allowed to reopen, and I'm sure that it will be at some point, hopefully this year, there will be a really big boom and a much greater appreciation for the industry. I think so many people have really missed it, and there's nothing like absence to make the heart grow fonder. So I think there's going to be a big boom once it restarts, and I think there's going to be a huge interest, particularly in sustainable and healthy food, and the experience side of it. I think people are going to be eager to learn about the food, but in a fun way, and I think that gives lots of opportunities for restaurateurs that are willing to be creative and agile.
I agree with you. There's so much clocked up demand. We all hunger for coming out being humans again and interacting with humans over that plate of food. And I agree with you as well on the chef bit. I believe a chef, the chefs have the ability to touch people much more than they think. They almost, in my world, has more power than a priest had in the old days, because everybody can get around a plate of food, no matter where you're from, background, wealth, anything. We can always meet over a meal, but we can't always meet over religion. So I think it's a very powerful position to have if you use it in the right way. So I think that was really well said. What about yourself, Domini, in these times as an entrepreneur? It's tough no matter what you do, and especially if you touch the food industry in any kind of way. It's also tough. How do you actually keep yourself going and showing up? Because you are super optimistic every time I talk with you. It's like you have this force of nature to just like a stealth steel shield in front of you. What do you do? Because I know everybody's human in the end of the day, but what is it that you do to actually keep yourself going and finding ways as well as you go through the pandemic yourself?
It's really important to have time for yourself, and work is not everything. And much as I'm passionate about what I do, and I do work hard, I don't think you can come at your work with the same degree of energy and enthusiasm if you haven't also given yourself enough sleep, and also enough time to have fun. And that might be when we're allowed to go and have a drink or a meal with friends and in a restaurant, but I also have things that I do at home. I play the harp, and for me that's very much my kind of relaxation time. And I'll always try to kind of break from work to kind of switch into more like evening mode, and I'll probably play my harp during that period. And I think getting out and about, really being actively observant when you get out and about, and just admiring the shape of the leaves on the trees, or the kind of form of the clouds. And the more that you engage actively with what you see outside yourself, I find kind of the more energy you get. And so I'll try and get out, do some exercise in the park, for example, and kind of be very observant while I'm doing that. And I think the other thing that really helps me is that I read, and I read lots of non-fiction books, actually. I love fiction too, but I find I get so into it I can't put the book down, so then I never get any work done. But non-fiction, I allow myself to read while I'm working and not just on holiday. And I find that that's just incredible, the amount you can learn from reading, and it just is really inspiring. Just connecting with other people, meeting new people, sharing ideas, and whether that comes through an event or whether it comes through regular reading, I just think that makes all the difference to me. So a combination of those factors is really what makes a difference for me.
As it's super interesting, you said sleep as the first thing. I think that's totally undervalued. I talked about it before, both on the podcast and other things, how you show up stronger as a leader. Because funny enough, when I've worked with some CEOs and founders, specifically founder-driven businesses, one of the first thing, the problems in their organization comes from them, and they are not in tune with themselves. Self-leadership, and actually where it starts great self-leadership, is sleep, because you need to plant the right seed. You need to have the right nutrition in the ground, so say. You need to do the right thing first. And if you don't get sleep, and I know that for having 2 young children, it's very difficult, but I'm very focused on that. That's the one thing I need to get right around my self-management, is my sleep. If I get that reasonably right, the other things becomes easier. Then I eat well, and then I exercise, then I feel in control. So it's interesting you started with that. So I totally agree with that. Super advice there again. To end off the conversation, I always ask, what are the top 3 advice to leaders out there, CEOs, to accelerate their businesses? But I think we'll take a bit of a different angle here. How can they actually accelerate making impact through food out in their businesses? What is your top 3 advice? Where should they start if they haven't started or they've begun the journey? But what we always say, these are the 3 things you start considering doing.
Well, I think I would start by looking at what's in the local area, speaking to suppliers, farmers, and really seeing that as a partnership, a collaborative partnership. Ultimately, they have a business that they can develop, much as you have a business that you can develop. And if they have a partner who is willing to work with them, they might be able to develop new products, process things in different ways. And I think having those close connections within the local area enables you to do things a bit differently, which then actually attracts customers as well, makes you stand out, and you then have a complete transparency over the way that things are grown, and you can start to encourage more sustainable practice by showing interest with your partners and your suppliers. So for me, it's all about focusing in on what the local area can give you, and then obviously looking further afield where you can't find what's available locally, and taking a collaborative partnership type approach.
As people go out on this journey and think, okay, I'm gonna pick that up because I know this is the right thing to do, where can they find you? Because I guess just looking at your website, maybe get in touch with you. There's like a lot of information you might can help people put them in the right direction. So where, if I'm interested, where do I connect and find you?
Well, obviously, the best place to find me is on email. It's just domini@tridentsupply.com. But obviously, you can find me on Twitter. I'm Domini at Domini Hogg. And the website also has a way of contacting us as well. And we run this blog, Saucy Dressings, which is great fun, and that's on Instagram at Saucy Dressings.
Great. Domini, thank you so much for coming on the show and talk about something we haven't talked about before, but it's so important to talk about as we go forward, like the connection between food, land, and us as consumers. It's definitely, again, I've learned new stuff again, so that's been great, and I'm sure out there we have planted some seeds about maybe rethinking the way we approach food as an industry, as we are reinventing or bringing the industry back from the pandemic. So thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome, Michael. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Domini, for giving a great overview on the complex subject of sustainability and how we as individuals and businesses can make more impact through our food choices. And if you want to get more information and insights on a sustainable food system, please also tune in to our episode 50, Time for a System Change, with Zoe Henderson, who is the founder of Function. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please share it, rate it, review, or subscribe to one of our channels. A big thank you to BizSimply for supporting us, bringing you great insights, strategies, and tools to help the industry thrive, not just survive. And also check BizSimply out on their website, bizsimply.com, and on their social at BizSimply or BizSimplyHQ, or just email them directly on advice@bizsimply.com. Tune in next time for another interview, and in the meantime, find out more about us and subscribe to our community and download free leadership tools at hospitalitymavericks.com. And don't worry, if you didn't get all of this, there will be links in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and be Maverick!